Now, Ms. Smith will be with us on the show tomorrow, so we can have a conversation about why she feels what she feels about her son's, unmistakable tragedy in his young death. Now, this morning, this is what made it interesting. I'm very surprised that Buster Murdaugh released a statement. Why? Well, because common sense and PR tells you if it had nothing to do with it, stay quiet. But obviously it became too loud. I've tried my best, he said in a statement, to ignore the vicious rumors about my involvement in Stephen Smith's tragic death that continue to be published in the media as I grieve over the brutal murders of my mother and brother. I haven't spoken up until now because I want to live in private while I cope with their deaths and my father's incarceration. These baseless rumors of my involvement with Stephen and his death are false. I unequivocally deny any involvement in his death, and my heart goes out to the Smith family. Joining us now for deeper understanding, NewsNation exclusive, Murdaugh family attorney Jim Griffin. Good to see you again, counselor.
Good evening, Chris.
Help me understand the affirmative step of putting out the statement that Buster Murdaugh did when you know, as a savvy practitioner, it would certainly fuel a news cycle.
Well, the situation that Buster found himself in was the longer he stayed quiet, the more this story got legs. And he struggled over time as to whether coming out and denying the obvious that he had no involvement in Stephen Smith's death would just give oxygen to the flames of the story. It appeared to us that it was going to continue until he put a stake in the ground and said affirmatively, unequivocally, it had nothing to do with Stephen's involvement personally or in his death. And so from this point forward, anyone who's reporting and putting Buster's picture adjacent to Stephen Smith's face when there are stories of exhuming his body is doing it at their own peril because it's clearly defamatory, and that's the stake we put in the ground today.
I understand the sensitivity. I do not think that it is by definition defamatory because all you have to do to be fair is to say which Buster Murdaugh denies. He has denied any involvement in this situation. And then you can report whatever your organization deems fit to print or say on air. This doesn't end people asking questions and speculating about what may have happened to Stephen Smith, especially given what I'm sure we would both agree on are very curious circumstances of a so-called hit and run.
I'm not directing my comments to NewsNation, Chris Cuomo's show, or the responsible journalist, but there is a significant amount of vile information, spewing information, absolutely defamatory information linking Buster to Stephen Smith's death. Now, are Stephen Smith's death suspicious? Was it a hit and run, or was it a intentional murder? I mean, Ms. Smith is entitled to those answers. And if anyone knows grief and can share grief, it's Buster Murdaugh. It shares similar grief as Ms. Smith. I mean, there's no greater grief than losing a child, but I can tell you there's probably no greater grief than losing a mother and a brother to a brutal murder. And this is not about Ms. Smith. This is about Buster Murdaugh trying to move forward and live his life in private without having to defend himself or he's having a difficult time getting a job. He's having, he wants to move forward and he is being totally harassed, and this story just keeps getting in the way of his life, and it's time for that to come to a close.
The problem here is that I have heard or seen nothing that is compelling to me that connects Buster Murdaugh to anything. He is a victim of circumstance because of his name. And it is curious that the police said it was a hit and run. Then the local police said, we don't think it was a hit and run, went to the state law enforcement authority, and they wound up doing nothing for a long time, which sounds like tampering or somebody keeping it quiet, which, of course, leads you to have to consider whether or not the Murdaughs had anything to do with it because of suspicions about how they abused their power. Not to connect it to Buster, but to his family. You think that's what he's laboring under? I
mean, there's public perception that is completely negative against the Murdaugh family, the Murdaugh power, and it's completely understandable. But I can tell you, having been involved in monitoring SLED's investigation for over a year and a half now, that there has been no indication, to my knowledge, of any involvement by the Murdaughs in Stephen Smith's death, cover-up. I mean, sure, there was information that Randy Murdaugh, maybe Alex Murdaugh, showed up on an accident scene, but these are personal injury lawyers. And that is not an uncommon situation for personal injury lawyers in Hampton County to show up at an accident. But that's the extent of it.
Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of NewsNation's fact-driven coverage.